Welcome to Harpswell Select Board meeting. There were some unanswered questions from our last visit we had from Cheryl Golek, and she brought 4 folks along that and probably have the answers, I'm guessing, tonight. So I'm going to let Cheryl lead off with it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with just letting everybody that came tonight introduce themselves and tell them who you are. You all know who I am. I'm your State House Representative for District 99, which is all of Harpswell and part of Brunswick. So I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Samantha Horn. I'm the director of the Maine Office of Community Affairs, which is a new agency. It's it just was set up by the legislature about a year ago, and I've been on the job since October. We're bringing together a number of state programs that we're intending to serve you as a one-stop shop for communities for issues like the Housing Opportunity Program, the Municipal Planning Assistance Program, the Coastal Program, code enforcement. There are a number of programs that are coming together in one shop, and we're already seeing some really nice discussion across topic areas that might not have happened otherwise to make it easier for communities to get sort of a coordinated, consistent response. So we'll be launching officially later this fall. Some of the programs are still in their home departments and are being moved, all the finances and the people and the desks and everything over the course of the fall. And so you'll hear more from us in a few months, but we're starting the discussion process, and so we're happy to be here to talk about things with you.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Hillary Gove, and I'm one of the 2 Housing Opportunity Program coordinators. My program currently sits with the Department of Economic and Community Development, but will be moving very shortly into the Maine Office of Community Affairs, also known as MOCA.
Hi, I'm Joan Walton. I'm the director of the Municipal Planning Assistance Program within the Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry for another couple of weeks. Thank you for inviting me back. I was here, I think, this fall when you had another issue, and I'm happy to be able to try and answer questions and help you again. Just very briefly, the Municipal Planning Assistance Program provides land use technical assistance to municipalities and regional councils throughout the state. And we are, by statute, required to administer the growth management program.
Good evening, all. I'm Ben Averill. I'm the other Housing Opportunity Program coordinator. And as Hillary mentioned, our program is going to be moving into the Maine Office of Community Affairs. We generally do housing planning and land use reform services for the state. And we are the program that will be administering the rules for LD 1829, 427, and 997. So some of the questions that you forwarded to us earlier today are questions that we will be addressing when we go through rulemaking.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first I want to start by saying I want to thank everybody that got together and submitted the questions. I'm going to try to answer the best I can a sheet of some of the questions because they have to do with legislative stuff and some grievances about the bills and things, and that's great. And so I'm going to try to answer them the best I can, which hopefully will answer some of the questions that I was left with at our last meeting. And then questions directed at the rulemaking and stuff, our guests will be able to better respond to. So I'm just going to start with that. And I'm going down one list, and I want to apologize. I couldn't get through all the planning board lists because between my work schedule and day, I got it today, and I just didn't have enough time to get to all of it. But I'm hoping to pluck away at most of them. And I'll start with this. I'm just going to read them off. How will towns address the added height requirements for affordable housing if they don't have the firefighting equipment capable of reaching such heights, and will towns be held to this? My response to that is LD 1829 accounted for these types of scenarios and gave communities the opportunity to review this based on their equipment. There's explicitly a provision in the bill that states if the fire chief or his or her designee determines there isn't adequate equipment to service the taller building, the bonus cannot be granted. And then question 2, how will towns like Harpswell be allowed to regulate ADUs? we have a real possibility of a ton being built and turned into SDRs. How do we make sure the ADUs are being built for permanent housing? LD 1829 doesn't take away a town's ability to regulate ADUs that folks would want to use as SDRs. Waterville is a good example of municipal regulation that ensures SDRs do not take away from permanent housing. Their ordinance says that there cannot be SDR stays shorter than 30 days in length. Old Orchard Beach requires SDRs to receive an inspection permit and pay a fee to operate. Similarly, Portland requires a permit and cap the total permits available. I would suggest that we as a town maybe consider and look further into this and research what other communities are doing to keep their ADUs affordable. Question 3 was, do you feel this law will be challenged by towns because of its encroachment on home rule authority, and how do you foresee the legal challenges playing out? Largely when towns are given correct information on what LD 1829 does and does not do, their concerns have been addressed. There are a couple of technical clarifications that are being worked on as part of the rulemaking process that I believe will also help in this regard. Ultimately, the state has legal authority to regulate zoning land use. Shoreland zoning is a great example of this. The state preempted local zoning by saying local municipalities must adopt shoreline zoning protections. Ultimately, LD 1829 and 2003 are focused on increasing housing opportunities, mostly with light touch density. And question 4 was, Maine is comprised of a multitude of different climate, geographics, infrastructural, and demographic differences. How will these laws affect an island community like Harpswell different than in Millinocket or Bangor? What rule will be put in place that addresses the differences all Maine towns have to deal with and are not always the same? LD 1829 still retains much of the local control, and that is important to the different types of communities here in Maine. Each community sets their own growth rates. This bill doesn't change that, and communities will be able to amend their growth areas as needed to ensure the growth that is happening is where the town wants such growth. In addition, this bill still empowers towns to adopt their own setbacks, lot coverage requirements, height requirements, design standards, shoreline zoning, and other land use ordinances. I believe this bill strikes a balance by setting a number of standards across the state to ensure we work to meet the housing demand we are facing, while allowing communities to have the local control they have always had. Ultimately, if someone wants to build a duplex on a 7,250 square foot lot, they might be constrained by topographical proximity to wetlands, setbacks, etc., and thus unable to build a duplex on that lot. Whereas somewhere else with the 7,240 square foot lot in town might be able to build a duplex because the site conditions are more favorable. There is still a lot of nuisance site to site that will render the additional density either possible or impossible. And the final question that I'll answer is, the question was kind of a statement too. It would be nice if someone could explain how this is all going to work and how it doesn't undermine the constitutionality of Maine's home rule as expressed in testimony by MMA and MCOG. Staff from DECD Housing Opportunity Program are ready and willing to assist municipalities in understanding the new law and the changes they may need to make to comply with the law. They are also making available funds to support towns. There is an extended implementation date with communities that amend their ordinances at the council level, needing to be in compliance by July 1st, 2026. And communities who amend their ordinances by town meeting have until July 1st, 2027. Additionally, I'd like to note that MA did submit written testimony in opposition to the bill, but they never showed up in person to a public hearing or work session. I wasn't approached with suggestions or changes by anyone who served on the MMA Legislative Committee or from MCOG. If anyone had approached me, I would have considered the feedback and final committee amendment. The Maine Association of Planners, however, testified in support of LD 1829. These are the professionals who work in this space every single day. They were also heavily involved in the amendments of the bill. And I hope that answers, that's the best I can answer those questions for you today. And there was some overlap in the questions from the planning board, and I will look back through them, and I will get answers that I can answer to those other questions. And I'll just ask everybody here, everything I stated with those questions, if you have anything to add or disagree with.
I mean, I
Agree.
think we can fill in the information about the rulemaking. We can talk a little bit about some of the questions about how subdivision works, that sort of thing. But I think that's your realm. So thank you very much for tackling it. Did anyone else have anything to add, or are we all set to move? Okay. So when you're ready, we're happy to take on whatever the technical topics you'd like us to, Representative Golek.
Okay. So I sent you guys a copy of the questions. So I'll start with, did you have a chance to look at them and able to see some of the technical questions that you could answer? And then there may be some people here that have some other questions.
So I'll just take a stab at maybe organizing our response a little bit. Is that okay? Yep. So I noticed your response. So to the questions from the select board, I noticed that there was a great reference in your response about the short-term rental ordinances, and I think that's a really important thing to note. Do we think that anyone in the audience wants to know a little more about short-term rental ordinances, or do you think that's something that you all will investigate sort of on your own?
Sure.
If you have information, we'd love to hear it.
Okay. So,
It was a very hot topic today.
okay. And
We did put together a committee a couple of years ago to dealing with it, and disaster, I think, covers it nicely. You know, I think people misinterpreted what the committee was about. It was more about looking into whether we should have ordinances or not. And a lot of people seem to think we're taking away their rights to have short-term rentals. Not, you know, and it's happened in other communities. You know, we weren't the first. I know Camden was going to give it a shot after us. Told them not to bother, but
okay.
it can only be done with the ADUs at this point. You know, Harpswell has so many short-term rentals, and I forget what the number is, but we're 46% non-resident taxpayers here in town. So close to half people live here in the summer, aren't here in the winter. And a lot of those are year-round rentals.
I do know that a lot of communities have tackled this topic, and so on the planner listserv, I see, you know, people swapping ordinances that they thought worked well or poorly, and so there is information out there. But we have a couple of planners in the room. Joan or Ben, do you have any observations you want to make about just short-term rental ordinances and how a town could tackle that in a constructive way?
Well, I think it's worth noting that both LD 2003 and LD 1829 give you the ability to regulate short-term rentals in how you see fit. So I know you mentioned that in the past you've had conversations at committee level. You can certainly go through and create permitting processes or other processes. Rockland was relatively supportive and had a relatively good permit process that is close to a decade old. There's been more communities that have been looking at short-term rental ordinances or short-term rental permit processes since LD 2003 became something that you would have adopted locally. There are probably other communities we can spitball on if you would like us to. And that's also something that our office can do some actual research on and get you ordinances if that's helpful. So we could share what other municipalities have done in in an email or in another chain to be able to share that with you.
It wouldn't hurt, and if we did this, we'd take a different approach. I think best way of putting it.
Some communities have chosen to do a registry first, just to get a handle on how much activity there is in town before deciding how to actually regulate.
The
Like
amount of
caps.
pushback we received from even just a registry was
Yeah.
unfathomable. As Kevin said, disastrous was
Yeah.
the best way to describe it. Any regulation that we seem to pursue on short-term rentals was met with significant pushback because of the significant economic driver it is for a lot of year-round residents
Yeah.
in this town, too. A lot of these folks own and work for these short-term rental companies.
I can understand that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
So, Lurk
Oh.
came out with,
Hey, Bob, want to go up to the mic?
sorry. Bob Goodrow. Lurk came out with some guidance, and is the state planning office coming out with any guidance?
Well, just.
Not a target on your
right,
head,
Right,
I'm
no,
just-
no. As a technical matter,
Thank
the
you.
state planning office doesn't exist anymore. And so, but the guidance could come from municipal planning assistance program or from the housing opportunity program, if that's something that is high priority. We are in a mode where one of the priorities for MOCA, once we form, is to get a lot of really good guidance that's already out in lots of places where it's hard to find, pulled together into a technical assistance repository of some kind that people can find things in. And I think that for a lot of these issues, a regional council or another entity may have already pulled together some models or some thoughts. And so what we're going to try to prioritize making available what's already out there first, and then fill in gaps so that we're not duplicating effort and wasting state resources. So I think that that would be an excellent topic for us to make sure that as we're gathering resources, we identify things that are already created that would help in that regard. So if that's enough, did you have something?
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't know if you feel comfortable talking with your neighboring municipalities or if you've had conversations with them already, but I do know that at least the city of Bath is restarting a short-term rental conversation through their housing committee. I live in Bath, so I know that that's
Oh,
what
okay,
they're working
yeah.
on.
And I know South Portland gave it a stab. And I don't know what became of South Portland, but did it fall apart?
I think that they had their own challenges, and I think
Yeah.
it's been evident in a handful of municipalities exactly what you've described, that it gets challenging to parse out the reasons why and to be able to accurately share how it could benefit the community as a whole.
But one of the things we looked at is complaints. A lot of it, you get a two-bedroom house and there's 20 people living there. Most of the people who handle it, the professional ones, they keep an eye on it. It's the private homes that, you see it all the time. There's a neighborhood on Bailey Allen, I was down there, there's probably 10 cars parked there. But
Okay.
beyond that, as most people think in this town, it's private property.
So maybe we could go next to the LD 1829 rulemaking process and answer your questions about timing and what the process is going to look like and how you can have input into the process. Does that sound like a good thing to do next?
I'm here for it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Hillary, would you like to take that?
Sure. So many of you may know that when LD 2003 was passed about 3 years ago now, so this is sort of the precursor to LD 1829, as part of those three statutes that are also referenced in 1829, that the legislature gave the Housing Opportunity Program the authority to do rulemaking for LD 2003. So a couple years ago, Ben and I did the rulemaking process a couple times, actually, for LD 2003. So that rule exists currently today. But because of the passage of LD 1829, we need to reopen that rule because now some of that information in the rule is no longer relevant because of the statutory changes. So the plan is to move quite quickly through the rulemaking process because of the implementation dates that are in LD 1829. So for your community, you can nod your head or yell at me if I'm getting this wrong, but you're a town meeting community. So the majority of the provisions that are in LD 1829 would need to be implemented in your community by July 1st of 2027. But there's a whole host of communities that have town or city councils, and their requirement in statute is for July 1st, 2026. So that's certainly coming right up. So the rule really needs to be in place as quickly as possible so those communities have more time to be able to address 1829 in their own local ordinances. So we are currently in the stage right now where we've been doing some, I would say, fact-finding and listening sessions to hear feedback from you all about where the sort of the sticky issues in statute that rulemaking can address. So we hosted a few sessions, but certainly if you have thoughts tonight as you're thinking through LD 1829, would love to hear those. But ideally, because of the fast pace, we are trying to open up the rule for public comment in October, early October. So when we open up the rule for public comment, that's a very formal process that is outlined in state statute. So we have to be very formal in how those comments are received. So we can either receive written comments or we'll have a public hearing on LD 1829, and we can also receive verbal comments during that public hearing. So there are those two channels to receive comments in. And I should just back up and say that when the rule is open, you'll receive copies of the rule, so you're able to see what we're proposing, and so you can provide feedback on ways to make the rule better. So that process per statute normally takes about a month or so that we have the rule open for public comment, and then once about a month or so elapses, then we are in charge of receiving all those comments, reviewing all those comments, responding to each comment in one document, and then doing a legal review with the Attorney General's office to ensure that our rule is sort of matching up with all the comments, and that we're not missing anything or doing something that we're not supposed to be doing. So that will probably take about a month or so. So I think ideally, if the stars align and everything moves as quickly as possible, ideally we'd have the rule out in early January.
And it's worth adding, for those of you that are interested in the functionality of how bills become laws, become rules, we did leave a primer on the table. So if you want your own conjunction junction, Schoolhouse Rock version of how this all works, that's on the table if you want to understand it.
I have a question about it, actually, since you brought it up. Is this considered major substantive rules, or are these technical, routine technical rules?
For the LD 1829 rule, that is considered routine technical, so it does not require legislative review.
How come when, based on your description here, under major substantias, it says that, or even if you go under routine technicals, they do not include any fees? If we're gonna have to send our planning board for training, that's where the town's gonna incur fees. And this is certainly gonna have an effect on property values, whether positive or negative, and that should be under major substantive, based on...
Do you want me to, or do you want to go ahead?
Well, so I think Rep. Golek might be able to sort of flesh this out a little bit more, but during the legislative process, that is determined by the legislature whether these rules should be either or. And I think if we don't want to move to a different topic, but Joan's in charge of, and Samantha are in charge of the LD 1751, and that's a major substantive rule, at least the initial rulemaking process. So, like, there are different paths for different pieces of legislation, but
I just find it odd that would be major substantive, but 1829 wouldn't be, because it seems like there's more meat to 1829 by far and more involved in it than there is 1751.
I think ideally, when we're thinking about routine technical versus major substantive, it doesn't always work out this way, but a good way to think about the difference is if the legislature has made most of the really meaty decisions in the law, and then the rule is just like adding clarity, then that's that doesn't need to go back to the legislature. That's a routine rule. If the agency is going to exercise discretion and make judgment calls about what the policy should be, typically the legislature wants to see that back again so that the legislature can sort of check the agency's work and see if the policy ended up being sort of in where they wanted it to be. So as a broad rule of thumb, you can think about those two kinds of rules in those two buckets. Is there anything you'd want to add to that?
No, I think you explained it quite well. You're talking, Matt, you mentioned the mandatory training requirements.
Yeah.
It's in it, and it's, and somebody correct me if I say the wrong organization, but I think it's the municipal, is it the municipal planning, the municipal association that will be conducting some of those trainings, or all of them? Does anybody here have,
Do you want to?
who will be conducting those?
We haven't.
Because they do a really good job.
Maine Municipal Association has existing training right now for planning boards and boards of appeals, which is required through, training is required for planning board, board of appeals members within 180 days of their appointment to those boards. But we haven't determined yet if our office is going to be Municipal Planning Assistance Program is going to be providing that training, or if we're going to defer to regional councils or other entities. We are looking at the substance of Maine Municipal Association's training modules right now for planning boards and boards of appeals, and we are working through that, but we're in the early stages of that. We will have more information for you. I just want to remind you that these were not emergency bills, right?
Right.
So they aren't even in effect yet. The laws, these bills were passed. So there's a lot of work that's been done so far. We have a long way to go. And we will keep you informed through our website and through other means, Maine Association of Planners, listserv. Margaret, I don't know if you remember or not, but you have great staff people here. We'll be communicating statewide as we get deeper into the details about that training. But it is on the forefront of my mind.
I also want to just mention that, that what the law requires is training, and it doesn't specify what that means. So, we're not directed to make rules about it. So it's really up to the community's discretion what kind of training they'd like to provide. What Joan is doing right now with her staff, as she spoke about, reviewing existing trainings that are out there that we know are high quality, we're going to be providing some suggestions or some guidance for communities that if you're looking for some of the agency's thoughts about what kind of training might make sense, given what the legislature appeared to intend, we're going to be providing that to you. But there's no, if you decide that you, based on the input of the planners that you're using or your own board's impression, and you want to go ahead with training, there isn't anything coming from the state that's going to say you can use this training but not that training. We will be working to see whether there are some ways to provide free options, like maybe video reviews or something. We'll be looking at guidance, but you are perfectly, you're perfectly free to decide what kind of training you think meets the intent of this legislation and go forward with it if you would like to. Joan's staff are experts in land use planning because that's what they do. And so I think what is going to be really helpful about the product that they provide will be some suggestions for what are probably some minimum elements and then suggestions for some extra things you might want to consider. So it'll just be advice from people who are in the profession really for you. Okay. Are there questions on the 1829 process before we go on? Yeah.
Amy Heibel, perhaps this isn't the right time because we're just talking about process, so I've got questions actually about the bill which we submitted, but because this is being televised and Harpswell residents will be able to view this, I would love to be able to just put those out there for the public, if that's okay.
Well, if they're legislative questions, and I won't be able to, if you're talking about the questions that you submitted from the planning board, I won't have answers for those.
You won't have any answers.
I will have answers for them, but I just got the questions today.
Okay.
So I haven't had time
Well,
to.
perhaps some of the other folks up here could answer, because you've got a land use planner up here.
We can do our best to tackle any questions that are technical in nature that we know the
Yeah.
answers to. We'll be happy to
Okay.
try.
That would be great.
Anything that's about what the legislature intended, or whether something is a legal issue that, we probably aren't the right people to answer your questions.
Okay.
I think I might just add the caveat too is that, we can answer the high-level questions about how the law potentially could be implemented, but we still have to do the rulemaking process, so that could change our answer based on the public comments that we received during that process.
Okay, well, let's see what happens. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. I'm Amy Heibel. I have a master's in land use planning. I was Brunswick's planning director for about 5 years, and I was the president of the Maine Association for Planners in the 1980s, so I'm 71 and definitely past my prime, but I do have some experience.
Yeah.
One of the questions that we met as a planning board yesterday, and we had a long discussion, a very good discussion about this, and lots of questions, but maybe this is, I think, one of our primary questions. And we were just looking at lot size and wondering if Section 7 would alter or eliminate Harpswell's minimum lot size, which is 40,000 square feet for a single-family unit. So does this mean then that Harpswell would have to allow 3 units on that 40,000 square feet, or essentially effectively reduce our lot size from 40,000 square feet to about 13,000 per unit? And does this allow these divisions to take place with up to 5 units without planning board review? I think we know it doesn't apply in the shoreland zone, so we got that question answered. So that's my first question. Is that too technical, or is that something that folks can't answer?
I think I can sort of take a general stab at 1829 and the fact that, as you noted, that there are now changes from LD 2003 and 1829 to lot area and density requirements that weren't present before in LD 2003. But I would say, I am painting with a broad brush here, but for the most part, most of those lot size and density requirements are geared towards areas that are in a designated growth area or areas that have public water and public sewer.
Yeah, we understand that, but this Section 7 applies to any area that allows residential development. So whether it's in a growth area or a rural area, it doesn't seem to matter.
Let me just make sure I have my. So I think it's helpful to look at Section 7 in coordination with Section 9. I hear what you're saying, that the 3 units can be allowed in any area where residential uses are permitted, but then I think Section 9 adds more meat to that by then further placing lot size and density requirements based on areas that have public water and public sewer and designated growth areas.
Yeah, but Section 7 says, notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, except Title 12, Chapter 423A. This is confusing for the average reader. It's very, very difficult to really understand what this is all about. So it's very difficult. I mean, you've given us a short time to make public comment, and yet you've given us a document that really is hard for the average person to understand. But anyway, it says, for any area in which residential uses are allowed, including as a conditional use, a municipality shall allow at a minimum 3 dwelling units, blah, blah, blah. So does that only apply in growth areas? Because it says any residential use.
And then if you look to B, it adds a little bit more meat to that by saying that it's 4 units in areas that are in a designated growth area or areas with public water and public sewer. But I think this is excellent that you're pointing this out, because I think this is what rulemaking can really clarify, sort of these questions about like what applies where, how does it apply, those type of things.
Yeah.
I also would just add that provision, Title 12, Chapter 423A, is the minimum lot size for subsurface wastewater disposal.
Yeah.
So I believe that the point of that reference is to make sure that you can't put a septic system
Yep.
on less than 20,000 square feet.
We,
because of the
yeah,
state law.
that's exactly right. Our minimum lot size is 40,000 square feet, so that's hence my question. Yeah, because that would, Harpswell it has a greater lot size than that. And so the question is whether or not this legislation effectively mandates a smaller lot size in our town.
And one thing that we haven't shared is because LD 1829 is effectively making amendments to LD 2003's existing statutes, what you're looking at in 1829 are only snippets of statute. And I'm sure you're aware of that, but I feel like it is definitely confusing for members of the general public looking at things. So when our rule comes out, it'll be much more easier, hopefully, to be able to see everything all together, how the interface plays together, instead of seeing that, trying to look at Section 7 and Section 9 and trying to understand that they're talking about the same part of statute.
Okay, so let me move on, and I'll try and excuse my possible nonsensicalness because I'm going to try and shorten this up. Section 12 says there could be no planning board review or approval for 4 dwelling units in a structure. And then Section 17E actually promotes the purchase of properties by out-of-state investors because it eliminates the requirement for the owner to live on an accessory dwelling unit lot. Our concern was that this is going to encourage out-of-state or for-profit entities to buy up or convert existing dwellings into rental units. And Harpswell really relies on its community, sense of community. And if we get out-of-state buyers or investors who start to buy up property, and everyone knows that Harpswell is a really unique and wonderful place to live, then this is a real proponent for those that want to do that. And slowly over time, or maybe even not so slowly, our concern is that Harpswell's sense of place will really be diminished because for-profit rental properties really erode the sense of neighborhood that most people have in this town. So that's a concern, and it's going to remain a concern. The other thing is Section 18 prohibits additional review of waste and wastewater permitting. What is the purpose of that language? Do you know? Why would you prohibit further review? Okay. Just want to raise that as an issue. The other thing is in LD 1751. I'm sorry, I'm moving on, and then I have one more thing to say after this.
Excuse me.
I'm sorry.
Amy, one of the things that, if I could just talk a little bit about how bills are presented
Yeah.
and what you're looking at.
Yeah.
This is not necessarily up to date. It's not. It's a 2021 Maine Land Use Law booklet. But I do have this section in here, Title 30A, Section 4364.
Yeah.
That's been amended here. And I think what you're looking at in Section 18, was that the one? Section 17, with the wastewater review being
Yeah.
precluded.
Yeah.
18.
That's 18.
That's 18, sorry. My brain's going. There are...
Join the club.
You have to, sometimes in order to understand what the bill is amending, you have to look at the law.
Okay.
So this is subsection B, section 4364B, subsection 7. there are A, B, C, D paragraphs within subsection 7. So I don't know this really well. This Bill 1829 doesn't fall in my jurisdiction, so I'm not an expert on it. But I'm just looking at the law, and I think you need to look at what was amended and how it relates to the language that's in the law right now.
Okay.
So you're not seeing all of subsection 4. You're looking at subsection 7, Sarah, sorry. You're looking at what's being changed. So anything that's underlined in a bill is what's proposed and ultimately adopted, added, and what's struck out is what's deleted.
Joan, what's the general content of that section?
I haven't really read it, but the title is Water and Wastewater. I'm going to defer to Ben or Hillary because it's your...
Well, just to get to the point, the language prohibits additional review of waste and wastewater permitting. It prohibits additional review, and the question is why? Because sometimes additional review is necessary or is warranted, but this prohibits it, and so that just raised our concern. We have some other things about LD 1751.
Amy, I just want to say
Oh,
that
sorry.
I hear your questioning around that, and I will work hard to get you more clarity. on
Okay,
that
thank
question
you.
to bring back to
And
you.
you folks have these. Let's see, the last one was LD 427. And that really allows developers of rental units, rental dwelling units, to meet parking requirements that are off-site up to a quarter of a mile away. And I just want to say, I want to ask, how was this agreed to? And I wonder if anyone considered the impact of this on the elderly, the handicapped, people with little kids, pregnant women, and others who have to walk from their car a quarter of a mile to their dwelling unit. What do they do with their groceries? What do they do in the wintertime when it's freezing cold? It increases the opportunity for accidents, for theft, for assault, and it adds to already difficult mobility issues. So I'm putting that out there. I just think this thing needs to be.
I'd like to respond to that,
Okay.
Amy.
Yeah.
I hear your concerns about it.
Yeah.
But there are many other, and it's a grievance, so I'm going to respond to it. Parking, this will allow more housing by doing this. Parking spaces can take up more spaces on a piece of land than the size of a house when you're building something. Some towns have regulations that say you have to have a parking space for, if you got 3-bedroom, you got to have 3-bedroom parking spaces. Well, most of those 3 bedrooms might be a single parent with a couple of kids, and they have 1 parking space. When we consider, I hear what you're talking about, and the walking and the distance, and people with disabilities are going to put those things in perspective of where they're living. We're also talking about a large homeless population and over 26,000 people waiting on housing voucher wait lists that need roofs over their heads, that are life-saving, that are living on our streets. So this finds a balance with the parking lot minimums and allows for more affordability of building housing. You know, and an example would be, you know, if somebody has, you know, a half-acre lot and they put, but on that half-acre lot, they could put 14 units and say some of them units are 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom. But if they have to put, according to the amount of bedrooms, parking spaces,
Yeah.
now they can only build a 6-unit apartment.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of consideration taken into this bill, and it was agreed on
Yeah.
in a bipartisan manner from people who work in shelters, who work with the homeless population, who work in housing, came out in support of this bill. And my hope is that this is a bill that will open up doors for contractors to be able to build more affordability and more units in the spaces that we have.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I just would like to just say I think there are going to be a lot of unintended consequences in this legislation, and they'll make their way known as it's implemented. That's one of them. I understand what our Rep. Golek is saying, and but I think that in order to be fair to one part of a population, it's possible that we will make it very unfair to another part of the population. And so anyway, I think there are unintended consequences, which happens all the time. But some of these could be, they could be pretty dire if you're walking home on an unlit street, you get to your apartment and you're assaulted. No, just saying. Thank you.
Can I add one thing?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So I just wanted to point out that there's a question here about subdivision. I hear the question mostly about the consequences of increasing the number of lots that are allowed to be divided every 5 years. But I also wanted to mention that there's been some discussion in the legislature about whether the current model for subdivision in state law is the best way to do subdivision in the state. And so I think you can expect to see the Bill 161 was carried over, and the HED committee will have it in front of them again this next session. And so even though this state agencies don't have regulations around subdivision, it's just what's in the law. And you know this from your experience, it's between like what the municipality does with the law and then any, the court system. There's sort of no intervention by state agencies. But if you're interested in how subdivision is constructed in the law, I think there will be a further discussion of that in this coming session. And I just wanted to you may be aware of that already, but I wanted to make sure you were.
Actually, no, I really appreciate that. I would just say I was around when the Growth Management Act was first passed, and I remember Governor McKernan going to every town, not every town, but 400 of them, and talking to people about how they wanted their community to look. That was the precipitator for growth areas, the whole idea of a growth area. And the idea of a growth area was really to absorb growth, which is really what this bill seeks to do in many ways. But the other part of the Growth Management Act was to protect rural areas and keep Maine rural. And I think this bill will erode that. That's my fear. It will make it very difficult for local planning boards to keep their communities rural. And that really greatly concerns me. That is not what the Growth Management Act was about. In fact, it's the opposite. So I have lots more to say, but just wanted to make that note. I know you're doing your best. Really appreciate your being here, too, to answer these questions. So we'll continue.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing all your concerns, Amy.
Do you want a brief overview of the process for 1751, since that was in the questions as well? Okay. So the growth management bill that passed, 1751, directs MOCA to begin stakeholder meetings, and so that will happen this fall. Because it's a complicated topic and because there was a lot left to discuss, and so it is a major substantive rulemaking, that rule won't be complete until the 133rd legislature. So you can expect quite some time between now and when that goes into effect. It'll be more than a year. So I think I know you're in the midst of finalizing a comp plan, and so I just wanted to let you know that, or I think you're in the midst of finalizing a comp plan. Okay. I just wanted to let you know that the timing is such that it probably won't impact your adoption right now. And certainly we welcome your feedback as we go through the process of understanding what the issues are around how to move LD 1751 through the process to a point where it is finalized. There's also a number of technical assistance documents that we're directed to prepare, and so I would anticipate we'd be working on those in 2026. We are, as I mentioned before, making a big push to get set up to do more technical assistance documents and make the ones that are available easier to access. And so I hope that by the end of 2026, you'll look around and you'll say, boy, there's a lot more available than there was, a year and a half ago. And so that's certainly something we're trying to accomplish because we know that smaller towns that have limited staff capacity, it takes a lot of effort to try to seek out a model ordinance or some guidance or some technical research, and it's not easy. You're relying on volunteers a lot of the time, and it's just a lot of work. And so we're trying to create systems that make it easier for towns with smaller populations to have access to the same kind of advice that you could get if you had a more a larger staff pool. So that's our intent with that. I think specific questions about 1751 it'll be a great time to address them when we're in the stakeholder and rulemaking process, because then we'll be able to really get into the nitty gritty. And we're literally, the session finished, like everybody's been trying to make sure that we can get all of the financial accounts and the contracts and the desks and everything moved from these other departments to MOCA. So I'm doing a lot of, I'm wearing a lot of the financial hat and the facilities hat right now, but pretty soon that will be done, and I'll be shifting more to some of these other tasks. So from the 1751 front, there will be more to come later in the year.
That's good. And, I think we're at the beginning of the rulemaking process too, with 1829. So my goal was to get to us, people to come today to maybe answer some questions around that rulemaking, understand how you can be involved in the process of the rulemaking, get some questions answered, and I understand the grievances with some issues with the bill that some people may or may not agree with, and as your representative, I will work on trying to find the answers for those to add to the answers that I already gave. But what we'll hear today, if anybody has any more questions around the rulemaking or...
One quick one, since you brought it up with 1751. We are finally, 4+ years later, ready to send our comp plan to be approved by voters. Is there any, to my understanding, any of these laws that were passed in the last session will go into effect in about 3, maybe 4 weeks or so here, the end of September? Are you guys aware of any new laws that would affect our comprehensive plan that we should be aware of before we send it out to voters to approve it, only to find out that we didn't include something that was passed in the legislature, that should have been included, and then the state doesn't approve the plan? You see what I'm getting at?
Well, I'll take a stab at that and see if anyone else here on the panel has more to add. But 1751 should not affect the implementation of your comp plan. And that's where most of the provisions for growth management are.
Yeah.
It may affect down the line, if depending on how it all plays out, you may decide there are things you want to go back and tweak or something. But I'm not aware of anything that passed this session that would immediately affect the implementation of a comp plan or the adoption of a comp plan. Are you, Joan?
No, I believe there's language in LD 1751, the Growth Management Law Amendment, that addresses the communities that are in your situation. My advice would be to proceed as you are.
Yep.
And we're not going to have our rules completed before November, when I believe you're targeting your town meeting. So we don't have any new guidance, any new rules, any new requirements, and we're not going to until...
That's what I was hoping
for
to
another
hear.
For another year and a half, or whatever the time period is, so...
You heard it, Margaret. We're good.
Keep going.
Hi,
Hi.
my name is Courtney Snellings. I am not trained in planning, or I haven't run anything. I am the regular person on the planning board, and I'm also on the housing committee. And I have a question that goes back to something that Amy had asked. This was section 17 about the municipality shall allow the construction or occupancy of an accessory dwelling unit on the lot, even if the owner of the lot is located where it's located, doesn't reside there. And we do have a concern about this. We do need housing here. And we understand about the short-term rentals, that this was a an issue. It's very, very complicated. But I'm wondering, will this bill preclude a municipality or perhaps requiring that the lot owner lives locally or lives in Maine or something? But we're not interested in having our community used as a cash cow. And so what I'm wondering is, does this eliminate the opportunity for us to tweak this a little so that it's not the person is on the lot, but perhaps is in the vicinity? And that's my question. Thank you.
Let me take a stab at a broad answer, and then I understand the details may need to be, I could be wrong, so you can correct me, but I understand the details will need to be filled in the rulemaking, and so I don't want to go any further than you feel like you can without going through the rulemaking process. But I think as a general principle, it seems to me, just from reading this and from knowing a little bit about the short-term rental rulemaking that, or ordinances that some communities have put into place, is that I believe this wouldn't affect your ability to have a short-term rental ordinance, but that just on the face of it, it does look like you might not be able to require that someone who's just building an accessory dwelling unit would have to live there in order to build the building.
I mean, live locally, that's what I'm asking, not on the lot, but something a little bit more restrictive, if you understand what I'm asking. Thank you.
I think I would just say to that with LD 2003 and 1829, there were definitely unique ways that towns came up with to address their concerns about 1829 or LD 2003. I think creative solutions can be excellent and very effective. I think my advice would be to run anything by your municipal attorney that could potentially have broader implications.
And the one thing we didn't mention, and this would be an example of something where some of these questions are questions that you may choose to submit through a rulemaking process. We may give you the same exact answer, or we may give you an answer that's slightly more formal. But if you feel like questions like that or other questions that you sent to us, you feel like other planning boards may have similar questions, we would encourage you to submit those through the rulemaking process. That would be a formal submittal once that process is open.
Can I just add with a little bit of clarification? When I had answered question 2 in the first round, it talks about the town's ability to have the ability to control our short-term rentals and to set ordinances and rules and regulations around that. And so I hope, and being part of the housing committee, I know that we've talked about ADUs and stuff, that we can continue to work towards a solution that will make some of these short-term rentals affordable and a better way to manage them at a town level.
Hi, I'm Dan Golek. I'm a member of the planning board. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate you coming out and answering our questions and maybe taking back a few of them that you can't answer on the spot. One of the things that I found interesting that both Ben and Joan mentioned is that some of the difficulty that we have. I didn't do that. It's one of my powers. That one of the things that may be giving us some issues is the fact that we are not seeing these amendments in the context of other laws. But this is all we have. And my question is, do you have a document that incorporates all of those things in so we can read this stuff in context?
At this point, I haven't seen a revision to the statute online, and that's where I go whenever I want to see what the law is.
Exactly.
But you could go to the Maine legislature page, and there's a way to type in, I would just Google Maine, which law you want, and Google's really accurate about bringing up Maine statutes. And you kind of have to take the bill and existing law and marry them. and
Yeah.
extrapolate and interpolate what the changes are that have been adopted.
Yeah, I've done that plenty. My question is, why can't that be provided to us?
We're waiting to get it from the revisor's office.
Okay.
It hasn't been released yet.
There's
as far as I know.
there's a process at the end of each session where the reviser of statute goes through every bill to make sure that there weren't any inconsistencies. And every session there are some inconsistencies, and so they make adjustments as needed to the actual text of what's going in the statute, so that, for instance, sometimes there can be cross-references that are missed, like one thing gets changed in one bill and a similar thing gets changed in another bill, and then the cross-references don't match anymore. And so there's a process of making sure that everything gets put in there correctly. I think what I sympathize with is the sense that the rulemaking will be coming pretty soon, and so you want to have a document that you can look at to better understand this. And so we can go back and see what our options are for what there might be for the public. I think one thing we want to be mindful of is that we don't want to publish anything that looks like an official version of the statute because the revisor's office hasn't gone through the cleanup process.
Right.
But I understand your concern, and we can talk about it and see what's possible.
That will be helpful, because I don't know how we'll be able to talk about comments on rulemaking before we have an understanding of how this all fits together.
I should just say, to clarify for the rulemaking process, that when we put out notice, as we're required to do, in addition to the notice sheet that we need to fill out, there's also will be a copy of the proposed rules, which you can read in its entirety. So that, it doesn't answer your question about the revisor's office, but there'll be that document that you can use as the basis for your comments.
Okay. Let me ask a question that I'm sure you can answer. As a member of the planning board, there are a number of places here where it says that the local planning board no longer has authority. Could you summarize those for us?
I think the big one is in section 12, which talks about 4 fewer dwelling units within a structure is no longer under planning board review. I would say that's the biggest one.
Okay. I guess the question that I have is, one of the reasons why we do have a local planning board is for complete transparency. And so at our public hearings, we're going through and talking about all the impacts that any change in use or changing nonconformity, that we can go through all of the steps with local knowledge about how is this going to affect such things as groundwater, which is just absolutely huge here, and understanding the context of the neighborhood and how it affects the fishing community and things like that. My concern, and I think it's one that you're going to hear some more of, is that we are concerned that there will probably not be that same level of opportunity for the public to be personally involved in the discussion over those individual changes.
I think that's a policy call for the legislature.
It is, and, it's also a question that, I've been working on since the last time that I was here to get more thoroughly answered. My understanding of that is that there still is going to be regulations. The builders, there's going to have to be codes. They're going to have to be, the town has setbacks. There's going to have to be enough water. There's going to have to be enough sewer in the areas that things are built.
Yeah,
I can't fully clarify that for you yet at this time. Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely a legislative question.
I do appreciate that, and we do have all sorts of codes that are required, but there are instances in which the code enforcement officer brings something to the planning board and says, do you want to take jurisdiction of this question? In which case we get into the nitty-gritty on a number of technical things, or do you just want to leave it over to codes? And in an issue that has a direct impact on the community, particularly on the broader community, if there's a question about whether we are going to take jurisdiction or not, we will take jurisdiction simply so that the public can be involved in the deliberative process. And what I see this doing, what I fear this does, is it takes away that opportunity for the transparency for the public to be involved. So the more you can take a look at that, the better off we are. Because, you know, as everyone else, we run into the complaints of, well, there's not enough transparency, and there's not enough transparency, and particularly when you're talking about land use that is going to affect different people, and it's going to affect water use and things like that. It's really important that everybody does get to have a say.
I will definitely work on, and am
Okay.
working on getting that answer. I still have a list from the last time I was here. I've
Okay.
gotten some of them answered.
Thank you much.
Well, did everybody got their questions answered?
I don't think they got all
Yeah.
of them answered, but
What's that?
I don't think we got all of them answered.
Well, you know, we made inroads.
Does
So-
everybody have a better understanding of what the rulemaking process is and how they'll be able to be involved in the questions and how the rules come out and stuff? Because, well, we have people here, go.
Can I just mention one thing? If you're interested in getting the notice about the rule and the proposed rule, I'll give you my card so you can email me and I'll put you on our listserv so you get that information.
There you go.
Me again. Hi, Courtney Snellings. I was listening to one of the recordings, Hillary, that you were really kind to send me. I was listening to that recently, and I noticed that several folks who didn't identify themselves that apparently are in municipalities like ours, no growth area, no public water, no public sewer, wanted to know how 1829 was going to affect them. But your answers were always, we'll talk to you offline. So that, for me, as the regular person, I'm wondering, how does this affect Harpswell? There's a lot of stuff in here that doesn't seem to refer to us, but I would love it if I could know exactly which parts would refer to us, or is there someone we can talk to get that information? Thank you.
I will just say our hesitancy to answer those questions is simply because we are not knowledgeable about every municipality's land use ordinance, so it's difficult to make that judgment call on a informational session. But I will say, as I said earlier, that portions of LD 1829 are focused on higher density and changes in lot size in areas with public water and areas that are designated growth areas. So hearing your feedback that Harpswell doesn't fall into those categories, you know, the rule's not done, but the bulk of 1829 will likely not apply. But again, we haven't done the rulemaking process, and I don't want to give you information that's not accurate at this stage, but I think, you know, there are communities that will be impacted probably more than yours just based on what I'm hearing today.
And I think it's
I
worth.
just want to remind people that the town's attorney also put out a nice letter about how it will affect us. And somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, our current comprehensive plan has growth areas in it. But the one we're looking to
No.
pass does
No,
not.
took it out.
No.
No, it
does
doesn't.
not.
From 2005?
No, it doesn't.
Yes.
The original
Yeah, 2005.
2005.
The current
No,
one that
I'm
we're-
not talking about the one
Okay.
we're looking to pass.
Yeah.
I get confused.
No. So when you pass the other one, we're not going to have growth areas.
No.
So there's, I think that the town's attorney, as I said in the last meeting, did a really good job at laying out how this bill potentially will affect us, and the rules aren't done yet.
Right.
Having said that, we're still at those beginning stages. So I just wanted to put that out there publicly, because I know it's a public document that anybody that watches this can at least look at.
And I just want to share, because I don't think we shared before, so the part of our role, of Hillary and I's role, that I think both of us like much more than rulemaking is doing technical assistance. So we are here to help once the rule is established. We're here to help you determine how to best adopt it locally. So we'd be happy to have conversations with you after the rule has been adopted on how that process should best work, whether it's coming back here and chatting with your planning board or your select board, or whether it's just working with town staff. We're happy to support you in that process.
Amy Heibel again. I want to reiterate, both Courtney and Dan, Dan especially saying that the transparency issue is really important here. And I understand that the effort is to create affordable housing, but if you're reducing transparency at the same time, that is, that's an issue. Government is already being under more and more pressure to be more transparent, and so it's something to think about policy-wise. One other thing, as the former planner for the town of Brunswick, Brunswick has a lot of historic neighborhoods. They're really lovely neighborhoods around the college, and people love those neighborhoods. And this 5,000 square foot dwelling unit size has the potential to encourage investors to come in and take those dwelling units down and construct apartment buildings in their place. And I put it out there again as a policy issue, and Cheryl, you represent parts of Brunswick, but if I had an historic district, I would be a little concerned here about what this is going to do to the building, to the look and feel of that neighborhood.
I just want to jump in for a second and say that Brunswick has met with everybody on this panel and had their concerns that they had answered differently than you in that downtown district. So we're not the only community having these conversations. I can only stay focused on where we're at right now, which is Harpswell. And yes, I represent part of Brunswick and was at that meeting as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you again for all you do. Unintended consequences, that's all I have to say.
I do want to comment to that, though. There are unintended consequences to many things that we pass legally. There are. And we come back and we legislate them. It's not a perfect answer, but it's the system that we have. We can't always pass something. We wouldn't get a lot of good work done if we always hope there weren't unintended consequences, but we can't always say that there aren't and come back in the hopes of fixing. We do that all the time. One of the things with 1829's hope was to fix some unintended consequences that happened with 2003. So I'm just using that as an example to try to say that, it's not the end of the road. It's a long process, no question. It can be frustrating. I, for one, am the first to say, I don't have all the answers, and I'm okay with that. We pass thousands and thousands of bills, and there's just no legislature that has all the answers to all the bills that we pass. So what I hope is that people get resources out of this and more involvement in the rulemaking process, understand more ways to get involved in the legislative process when we're passing the bills, and we can continue to move forward and work together on implementing all of these so that they are helpful to our town. That's my hope.
Are we good? I want to thank Cheryl for putting this group together as quickly as she did. We had her on here, was last month, I guess, and it was nice to get all these things answered as much as possible anyway. So, complicated issue. So, in that case, if everybody's done, I think we're good.
Yeah. I just want to say I appreciate the town so much for making the space for this and for the communication for the people. I think it's really helpful.
Glad to do it.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.